You're listening to The Power Project. I'm your host, Brandy Voth, and it's my goal each week to inspire you to go out and lead purpose-filled lives while owning your God-given power. And not one to shy away from tough subjects, I like to bring topics to the forefront that we might otherwise not discuss. Today's conversation is exactly that, and I encourage you to lean into this conversation. My guest today, Tess Clarke, does work with refugees and displaced individuals in the United States. She has been doing some amazing things down on the Texas border, and I know that you're going to be inspired by her today while you hear maybe a different way than what you have thought about this subject in the past. So without further ado, I encourage you to have an open ear and an open heart. Let's jump right in, shall we? Hey guys, and welcome back to The Power Project. I'm very excited to be on the couch, literally, with my guest today, Tess Clarke, and I have driven down to a little further into Dallas to come visit today so that we could bring you this episode in person. And typically, I'm at home behind a computer, and I don't get to meet my guest in person. So this has been a delight. Thanks for having me in your home.
Yes, thanks for coming.
It's delightful. It's just such a great little house. Like, it's got amazing curb appeal. We've got some good lighting, and I think it's important that we just bring some topics to the table that we don't necessarily think about in North Texas or talk about openly in North Texas. And so I heard you on Jamie Ivy's podcast.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I'm so jealous of that. Tell me she's just as great in person.
She is. She's so great. And we were in El Paso last week, and she came and we spent 2 days together learning on both sides of the border in Juarez and in El Paso just about what was happening and what the crisis looks like kind of firsthand. We went to really bear witness and to learn from people on the ground there. So she came with me, which was really cool.
That's awesome. I totally followed the Instagram stories and
Yay.
Followed along the journey, followed the story, and I was really grateful that you brought those pictures. I personally have only been to Terlingua and Lajitas area of the Texas border, which is a much more serene, peaceful experience, right? And people kind of come and go freely, each side very harmoniously in that area from what I personally have witnessed. And that's my only experience I have with the border. And I hate to say it, but at 37 years old, almost 37 years old, I guess I was still 36, my husband and I traveled for our anniversary down to Lajitas and Terlingua. Yeah. And I was like, oh, like, that's the Rio Grande? Like, it's kind of like shallow and narrow, and you can just walk across and like scan your passport at the kiosk to go in and grab some.
How long ago was that?
That was like December of last year. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was really, I was like, this is nothing like what I see in the news.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not El Paso and Juarez. So if you could just give us, my viewers don't necessarily have a clear image of what the border looks like. We see what we see on mainstream media, and I know that can be so skewed and so different. And so if you could just give us a firsthand take on what that looked like.
Yes, I would love to.
So for just everyone that's at home that only gets a taste of what is perceived to be happening at the border, could you give us just a firsthand take on what is the actual situation?
Yeah, so the situation's changed a lot since 2016 up until now at the border, and so a lot of things are coming down the pipe, and as policies change, really the realities for people migrating change as well. And so one of the things that we witnessed just last week is how the Remain in Mexico policy has really changed the dynamics on the other side of the border, and how churches and shelters in Mexico are really having to pivot and kind of even change some of their missions to accommodate the migrants that are staying back in Mexico. And so if you go into El Paso, it probably looks like it did before we started hearing about caravans and people coming, because of what's called metering, which is when people come up to the border and basically are told by Mexican officials, here's your number. This is when you can come back and claim asylum. And so you can claim asylum when your feet hit American soil. So this process is keeping people back from touching American soil until their number is called. And so because of that, you see a really big burden happening on the Mexico side, and their infrastructure in some way suffering because it is a poor country and they're really unable to accommodate some of the migrants that are coming up to the border. And it's really been an interesting change of events because our systems and our policies and our laws were really built for single men coming from Mexico for economic reasons. So all of our holding facilities were built to accommodate them, which is why we've seen some of the really dire conditions, is because they weren't built for families and for children. And our policies that we're putting in place are making it more and more difficult for people to come to the United States legally. So people then are crossing between ports of entry. They're, like we all saw the tragic photo of the dad and his daughter who drowned crossing the Rio Grande. They had been waiting for 4 months, I believe, to just get a number to claim asylum. They were in Mexico. They were out of money. They were becoming desperate. And they know if I can get across and get my feet on American soil, they have to hear my asylum claim. And so you have a lot of desperation happening on that side of the border and on for the people who are trying to get across in different ways, because getting here legally has become much more difficult than it was 2-3 years ago.
Well, and that's interesting. I just had a conversation this week with a lady that's from England that's been here for 15 years. And she said the exact same thing. Her daughter's visas ran out and she's going back to England. And she said it's easier to get in illegally than it is legally. And she said that's the problem, with it. So I want to back up just one moment, and then I want to go deeper here into why the people are even coming and what this looks like and how it affects us. So since we just went straight into the heart of it all, why don't you give me a little backstory on how you have even become involved with taking trips to the border, why that's on your heart, why that's your mission. Give us just your backstory of how this all evolved.
Yeah. My husband and I started a nonprofit here in Dallas 11 years ago called Seek the Peace, and we've been working in a refugee and immigrant community doing all sorts of different, what we would call services, ESL classes, clothing closets, a literacy program for kids after school. And as we actually moved into the community, and as we were living there and really getting to know people and listening to their stories, we started to realize how difficult those journeys were to becoming immigrants and refugees. So now they're here in the United States. They have status, particularly refugees. They're here legally. They're living and working. But the trauma of leaving their homelands and some of the things that they had seen and some of the things that had happened to them, they were living with all of that. And so just as we got deeper in people's stories and started to get to know them, we realized that not only was trauma care really something that was needed in that community, but also policies that allowed those people to flourish. And so we started doing some advocacy work with our senators and our congressmen and in communities and at churches, and just saying, hey, there are actual policies and laws that are harming our neighbors. And we know this firsthand. We're living in the community. We're even experiencing some of these things. And so that's kind of how our work in advocacy got started. And then in 2016, when the travel ban came into play, those were our friends and really people who were now our family that felt threatened and scared. I remember my friend Huda calling me and saying, people don't want me here. Americans don't want me here. Can I go to Target in my hijab? I'm really scared. And to hear her fear and to watch what she was experiencing, it was kind of that moment where it all clicks, that when you flourish, I flourish. When you feel safe, I feel safe. And we knew that we had to do more. We had to go deeper. We had to begin to ask hard questions, to stand up for these people who, none of them are voiceless, right? I don't love the phrase, give a voice to the voiceless. But I get what it means in that their voices aren't being heard and they're not being validated and they're not given space to even speak into these issues, particularly people who can't vote in the United States, who are undocumented in the United States, who are living their life in various forms of in the shadows, right? Or even have come from a country where they didn't know if they could trust the police officers. They didn't know if they could trust their elected officials or their officials, whether they were elected or not. And so there was just a lot going on and a lot of fear in that community. And Jason and I were thinking we really have to engage in this. And so that's kind of how it all got started, was in response to the travel ban, saying, okay, we need to come up with talking points. We need to educate people who are constituents in the United States, who can call their senators and congressmen, who can get meetings with their pastors, with their community group leaders, with their Bible studies, and say, hey, as a people who have an ethic that every single person was made in the image of God, every single person has the right to flourish, every single person has God-ordained dignity, we have to advocate on behalf of them, because we believe not only has God brought them here into our communities, but that we have something to learn from them. This isn't about, oh, this poor person over here. This is my brother and my sister, and they're being harmed. And I'm going to come alongside them and contend for them, for their flourishing, because I know it's connected to mine and to my community. And that together, when we all feel safe and secure, we're better as a people.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you say that you don't like the term of the voice for the voiceless. I have a heart for traffic survivors, and when God laid this on my heart, and I would like to know your journey as well on this. But when God started calling me to this, I'm not a okay, God, let's do it kind of girl. Yeah. I like to argue and decide if it's really Him or if it's me, and if He's really calling me to that. And so I kept thinking, like, I don't know why I would be called to the trafficking fight. I've lived a great life. It's been very abuse-free. It's been really beautiful. And I don't know how to empathize with these people, with these women that have gone through the trauma and experienced life the way that they have. And I had my answer from a survivor herself when I asked her. I said, I don't know why God's calling me to this. And I just need to have conversations with you so that I can understand better. And she said, so that you can be a voice for those of us whose voices are not heard.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it gets overused and trite, but it is true. And it is God using someone that's a willing vessel to say, hey, I have the privilege to be heard, so I'm going to speak up for someone else that you might not listen to. And I think that is what the true form of being ambassadors for Christ looks like. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, and I hope that I kind of clarified that term, in that I think sometimes we feel like when we say that person might hold less value in the kingdom. And so I just want to kind of change the terminology to the reason that they're voiceless is because people in power haven't given them space or a seat at the table, but not because they don't have a voice. Not because what they have to say isn't powerful or it doesn't matter. And part of our job as people who have been given a version of the seat, and I would say as women, we haven't been given a full seat.
Right.
That we would then use that platform and that privilege to elevate their voice, and when we can, to give that seat to those people, to put them at that table, to say, my husband and I have been invited to speak and share a refugee story, and we say, we know a refugee who can come and share their story.
Yeah.
Let them come, and we'll pass that opportunity on to the person whose story it truly is. So in those places and spaces where it makes, I don't want to say makes sense, but because sometimes it doesn't make sense to do it, and we do it anyway.
Right.
But what I've heard from people in the margins when they hear that term is that it makes it sound like they have nothing to say.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know that you and I both would say, no, they have a whole lot to say.
Yes.
The reason we're sitting on this couch is because they have been gracious enough to tell us their stories.
Yes.
They have been gracious enough to invite us in to those spaces in their life where they maybe have held people back, where they've said, I don't want to go here because it's too painful and it's too hard. But in their gracious giving, they've allowed us to sit on a couch like this and hear their story, and we've learned and we've grown. And honestly, I've seen God's faithfulness and God's character in the stories of the refugees and immigrants and migrants that I know in ways that I have blown my mind.
Yeah.
I feel closer to God. I feel more in tune with him. I feel like I know him and I understand him in a deeper way because of their stories. And I often think, what are we missing out on when we push people out of the room? What are we missing out on?
Well, I mean, let's be totally honest. I was raised, and not by anyone's intentional doing, but I was raised where Jesus was a white conservative from North Texas. That was
right. Your perception.
That was my perception, and that wasn't taught from the pulpit or verbalized specifically, but that was what I saw Jesus. And it's interesting that we're actually recording this on 9/11, which crazy that I didn't even think about that when I booked you. It was like, oh, this Wednesday's open, and I was thinking about it this morning because I always every single year go back to where was I, just like I think every single American that was old enough to know the story, to live the story, goes through. And so I go back to I was 19 years old. I had just quit college 2 weeks before. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. But God had a plan. Yeah. And I was an international studies major that had just been at an international conference in D.C. and New York that summer. And college was the first place that I had the opportunity to meet my first Muslim friend, to meet my first gay friend, to meet my first friend from the Bahamas, right? Like, and I had this diverse group that it shocked me in the beginning because I had never really met anyone that didn't vote like me, that didn't believe in the same God as me, that had a completely different socioeconomic background than me. And it was the first time that I was in community with other people and was able to learn about them. And I say this because I think I was perfectly placed there for 9/11 to be taking place at that point in my life, because I was able to see it through such different lenses than I would have maybe seen it before that, when I had never had exposure to other people that didn't look like me. And I was able to see it in a place of, I think fear wrecked our whole nation at that point, but I was able to say, I know good people. I know good Muslims. I know that there are bad people in every culture. So speaking to that, I think a lot of people hear refugee or illegals or immigrants, and it does spark fear, a little hesitation maybe. How did you have a heart for that? For something that may look scary for someone else to get involved with it?
Yeah.
Like,
I think in some ways I kind of cheated that because refugees weren't politicized when we started working with them. We've been resettling refugees officially since 1980, and have resettled, sometimes 90,000 refugees a year. No refugee has ever committed an act of terror in the United States. And so it really, wasn't a politicized issue. I didn't walk into that scared. I walked into it really curious, thinking, what is kind of here for me in the ways that people, I've always, similar to you, been fascinated with other cultures and people, and this was a concentration of other cultures and people in this one community in Dallas called Vickery Meadow. It's 5 square miles, and it's got over 150 languages represented and spoken, and some of the best food you'll ever eat in your whole life. Did you know of these grandmothers' kitchens?
Did you know that honest to goodness, even doing the work that I do, I did not know we had a refugee camp in Dallas until your interview that I heard. I'm sorry, a community. Yes.
Yeah. So Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston are some of the cities that have resettled the most refugees ever. A lot of it's because the cost of living is lower here. We have a good economy. There's a lot of entry-level job opportunities. And so that people come over, and a lot of people come over highly educated. I've met people who are doctors, professors, lawyers, engineers, surgeons in their countries, but none of their degrees transfer. So they come and they'll very willing to work any job that they can get. And so there's a lot of like positions, particularly out in some of the outside of the city at factories and warehouses and assembly lines. And so they'll take those jobs, and a lot of them go back to school to study what they already know how to do, but so they can get that American certificate and then begin to practice really their trade and their passions here in the United States. They're some of the hardest working, most resilient people I've ever met in my life. And I think that that's been really, for me, working in that community and living in that community, how inspiring it's been to meet people who've lost everything and still choose to really kind of fight for the ability to flourish. They're saying, no, I'm going to show up every day in my life, as hard as it is, as many obstacles as there are, and the fact that I don't speak English at all.
Yeah.
And I'm being dropped in the middle of a place where it's necessary to do. I've never had to get a driver's license. I've never had to take a bus system. I don't know how to go to the doctor here. I mean, all of the things. If you just even take a minute and imagine what it would be like if you were moved to the middle of Amman, Jordan.
Yeah.
How turned upside down your life would be. None of your credentials transfer. You're literally taking any job you can get to provide for your family, and you don't know how the culture works. And these people are coming here with every card stacked against them, and they're succeeding, and they're contributing to our economy, to our culture. They're not coming to take away from something that we have. And I think sometimes it sounds scary because it sounds foreign, but I haven't met a refugee or an immigrant to date in all of my work in 11 years in these communities who have come to take away American idealism. They literally embody it. They are the American dream. In that you can be anything, you can climb any ladder, and they want to do that, and they also want to continue their culture. They want to invite us into their culture and bring some of that in. That's how America started, as this melting pot of people who are bringing the very best of themselves and the best of their communities and their cultures to the table and inviting people to share in those. And I think when we get caught up in kind of this nationalism idea of like, make America great, it sometimes it feels like it leaves out all of the things that we might be scared of or we don't understand. But those are really the things that make us great.
Yeah. And I think that it's interesting when you speak to that topic. So I brought you like a strudel today from, my husband's hometown, which is a German town, and it's around the turn of the century was established by an entire community of Germans, where German was spoken only in the community until World War II. And so it's interesting to me to see in that short of a time frame how we've shifted, and we've forgotten that we were all immigrants. My family were Irish immigrants that came here. And I think what you're doing with the trips to the border is the best way to put humanity into the cause, into the fight. The stories that you are telling firsthand are crucial for us. And I know I've watched really closely Hurricane Dorian, because the Abaco Islands are one of our favorite places on the planet. And it's easy to see on the news that a massive hurricane wiped out a chain of islands and go about your day. But when you know people personally, that I know a family there that has had a cafe for 35 years where they make cinnamon rolls and fresh bread. And it's amazing. And the woman that owns it, her name's Florence, and she radiates Jesus when you go in. And they lost everything. Like parents, grandparents, children lost their home, their business, and they were evacuated to Nassau. And you look at that, and I know personally, like, oh my, how scary is it going to be for them?
Yeah.
Okay, they speak English. They're being sent to countries where they still speak the language. But they've lost everything. They have nothing but the clothes on their back. And I'm able to put a face with that fight and with that struggle, which is so, so important. Hey friends, if you're a parent like me, I don't have to tell you how scary of a time it is to be raising teenagers. While the internet is an amazing resource that brings us together each and every week, it can also be a playground for hidden dangers. That's why we at the Power Project have partnered with Bark, an app that's dedicated to help keep kids safe online and in real life. Last year alone, Bark helped protect nearly 3 million kids with their groundbreaking products for families and schools. By monitoring text messages, YouTube, emails, and 24 different social networks for potential safety concerns like cyberbullying, self-harm, violence, sexual predators, and more, Bark allows busy parents to rest easier knowing their kids are better protected from digital dangers. You can head over to bark.us and use promo code POWERPROJECT to save 15% off your order. That's bark.us, promo code POWERPROJECT. Can you give us, when we talk about, because we're in Texas, I know I keep going back to the Texas border and what we're seeing in our climate right now, can you give just a testimony, some stories, some faces to why those people are coming, why we should even care as to why they're seeking to step across and get asylum?
So what you see happening right now, and we were chatting a little bit before this video, or maybe during the video, now I can't remember, but that families and children are coming, and unprecedented numbers of families and children. Now, our numbers actually are down from like people coming to the border, but our numbers of families and children are up. So just to differentiate that. But what is happening is in the Northern Triangle, in different parts of Central America, it's really been overrun with gang violence. I mean, Venezuela has one of the highest rates of murder per capita, and people are running for their lives. And I think that's sometimes it's really hard for people who've grown up in the ways that we have to even imagine. Like, I've sat with people and heard their stories, and I am a 9 on the Enneagram, and my strongest thing on Strength Finders is empathy. So like, I can, as much as I can, I think I'm like equipped just in the way that I was made to put myself in that situation, but I still cannot imagine it. I have 3 kids. I cannot imagine having to pack them up in the middle of the night, leave everything that I have and run because there's a gang in my community who said if my son Roman doesn't join their gang, they're going to kill all of us. And so my choice is to save my son and leave everything behind. And this is happening over and over and over again. And I think one of the most kind of like interesting parts of this work and of working with people and hearing their stories is the common theme that you hear. It's so common that it feels like, are you guys reading from a script? I mean, you know that they're not. This family's from Honduras. This family's from Guatemala. This family's from Venezuela. Like, they don't know each other. They're not in the same migrant shelters. They came at different times to the border, but yet they have these harrowing accounts of leaving and why they left. And everybody's journey looks different, but it feels like some of the factors, the contributing factors to running are so similar that you're going, there's an epidemic of gang violence in their communities. And they're already vulnerable people in their communities. A lot of these people are already living in poverty. And so they are the most susceptible to being killed, to being extorted, to having their children forced into gangs because they don't hold a lot of power. And so they don't really have a choice. There's a poem by a Somali refugee named Warsan Shire, and the very opening line is, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. No one runs for the sea unless it's safer than the land. Nobody puts their baby in a boat." You know, there are just some realities that I think sometimes if we can, as much as we can, back up and imagine, if this was happening to me, what would I do? We can move towards people in compassion. And that doesn't mean that every single person who comes to the border in the United States gets to come in. That doesn't mean that I don't advocate for just totally open borders, right? But it does mean that we give people a chance and an opportunity to tell their full story. And so we were just at a migrant shelter in El Paso last week, and we met with a man named Carlos who was telling us his story. He's Guatemalan. He had a shop where he cut hair. He was a barber. He has his wife who was pregnant with their baby girl. They have 2 boys together. And he went to visit his brother one night at his brother's apartment, and he said, we heard screaming coming from a little girl. So we start looking around, And we finally find where it's coming from, and we realize this little girl's being sexually abused by a man. And so we are like standing at the door. We're refusing to go away. We're knocking. They won't open. So we called the police. The police came, arrested the man, and took the little girl to a safe home. It goes 3 days later, a woman shows up at my brother's door and says, that was my daughter, and it was none of your business what was happening to her. Basically, I gave her to that man, and now you'll pay. So him and his brother, and we're looking for, your brother, kind of go into like a version of hiding, like they go stay with a relative in a different part of Guatemala, but it's really hard to like provide for your family. He's got a wife and kids, and so he comes back, and there was a gang who was looking for them, ends up shooting his brother 8 times. By a miracle, his brother lives, but now he's disabled, and they're looking for him. And just as he continues to kind of live life on the run, he was talking to some people that hold some power in Guatemala, and they said, this will never end unless you disappear. So he packs up in the middle of the night, and he leaves, and his family was being threatened, and he thought, this is the best way to care for my family and to protect my life, and if I can get to the United States and claim asylum, then maybe I can bring my kids and my wife and my baby here, and we can be safe. And I'm just listening to his story, and he's just breaking down, telling it, and he says, I lost everything. Protecting that little girl cost me everything, but I would do it again.
Wow.
I would do it again because I have a daughter who he hasn't met now. She was 1 month old at the time, and he'd been in the United States for about in Mexico waiting to claim asylum in the United States for about 3 months. So his daughter was born without him home. He says, but I would want someone to do the same thing for her. And I'm looking at him like, you're a hero, and you're being treated like a criminal.
Yeah.
You're being treated like you're a pariah on society, right? We've heard some of the language coming from our administration about people coming to the border. They're rapists, they're criminals, they're drug dealers, they're gang members, and they're running from all of those same things. The people coming and turning themselves over at our border and asking for help and are desperate, they are running from everything that we don't want in the United States as well. And so I think there's a lot of stories like that that I've heard, and particularly some of the stories, and again, you think, I know there's no script here, but of what it was like for the people who did get picked up crossing between ports of entry and were put in custody in the United States, how terrible it was. What they were being forced to do, that the water fountains that are connected to the toilets in the centers were broken, and their kids are crying and they're thirsty, and they're all sleeping back to back because there's nowhere to lay down. There's might be a cell that's made to hold 8 people, and there's 35 people inside of it. And everyone takes turns laying down and sleeping, and some people are literally scooping water from the toilet bowl to give it to themselves and their children. We met with a pastor who opened up her church in El Paso to host migrants when they were being released into the United States before remaining in Mexico. Over 4 months, she hosted over 7,000 migrants. She said God just kept telling her, give me 24 hours. So she would open up the doors for 24 hours. She still has the cots where people slept. She has pictures of people coming in. She was feeding them. The community really rallied around her. But she said almost every person who came had an infection in their stomach from how poor the conditions were and from the things they were having to eat and the water that they were having to drink in our facilities in the United States. And that was an interesting part of hearing people's story. And I think part of it was that they expected the journey through different regions to be hard. They knew that hiring a human smuggler, or what they would call a coyote, they would endure a lot to get here, but I don't think they expected to be treated the way that they were when they got to the United States. And that was like every person who was telling their story would their voices would crack, and they would get emotional and start crying when they started talking about their experience in custody in the U.S.
And what would you say, I want to visit this because we talked about it earlier when you and I were chatting off camera about what Jesus would say to us today, or who he put himself in position with, or what our call really would be in this position.
Yeah, I think scripture is so full of welcome the stranger, welcome the stranger, welcome the foreigner. Biblical hospitality is not entertaining you, Brandy, who have a similar life story as me, who we can have a great time together. And that's part of being hospitable, but biblical hospitality is bringing the foreigner in as if they were your brother. And what was happening in biblical times, and is still happening now, is that foreigners, migrants, immigrants, refugees were some of the most marginalized people in society. So God is saying, open your doors to them. He knows they are the most vulnerable people in the story. And God continues to show us himself and his character through the migrant journey. The Israelites were migrating. Abraham, who we would call the father of our faith, had to flee to Egypt during a famine with his wife Sarah. And at what we would say now would be the border, lies and says that Sarah is not his wife, but his sister, right? He tells her, hey, you're really beautiful. I think they might hurt me. And so lies and basically traffics her. She's now a sex slave. Abraham's being paid for that, right? And builds wealth off of really trafficking his wife at the time and lying to get into a country. But we excuse that because we see the full story. And I think sometimes, what Jesus would be saying is see the full story. Step back. I've left you stories. The whole story in the Bible is a migrant story. And Jesus, when in his time on earth, continued to go, who are the most marginalized and vulnerable people in society? I'm going to elevate them. I'm going to liberate them. I'm going to go to them. The Bartimaeus, the blind man by the gate, who everyone walked by for 30 years and ignored and never saw. I'm going to look at you. I'm going to ask you what you need, and I'm going to heal you right here in front of everyone. Because I said, all of you have passed by, and he's been ignored. The woman at the well, right? The woman who was bleeding and touched his hem. Like, Jesus is continuing, the leper, like he's continuing to go, the people who everyone else has ignored are the people that I see and I value. And if you want to join me in healing a broken world, if you want to join me in what I'm doing, go and do likewise. Go and do the same. And I think that's what he would say to us.
Oh, you took it to church. Took it to church. What would you say to the woman sitting at home right now that says, I have a specific set of political beliefs, okay? Because we are in a culture of it is black, it is white, it is this party, it is that party, and we have to be, you're either gluten-free or you eat all the gluten, right?
Right.
To someone that says, okay, you're tugging at my heart, and I can recognize this. I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I have kids, I can only imagine what it would be like if my country had civil war broken out and gang violence and I'm trying to escape. Because that's an easy answer. We can all say yes. We pack our kids up and we leave. Right. We flee. But that person that is having a hard time wrapping her brain around the political side of it.
Right.
But what would you just say to her heart today about how she leans into this conversation a little more?
I think diversifying your news sources is a really great way to start to engage this issue outside of identity politics, outside of saying, okay, I don't identify with a certain political party. I feel kind of politically homeless, if you will.
Apolitical, right?
and I mean, I'm definitely political, but I'm not saying, okay, I'm subscribing to what one party is offering me, right? I'm kind of looking for a third way and a broader option. And so I think remove some of that fear from if you start to explore this and what you learn and what you begin to understand and see. If you voted for a Republican and that's the party who seems to be anti-immigrant right now, you get to call and say, I voted for you, Ted Cruz, for an example, in Texas, and I want to know how you're advocating and fighting for the humane treatment of our brothers and sisters. As a believer, I believe that every single person was made in the image of God and sharing mutual dignity and humanity. I know that we need laws. I believe we can be a nation of grace and a nation of laws. So I want to know how you're leaning into that issue and you are holding people accountable to treat every person with dignity. And so I think that we can remove some of the fear, some of the politicization, if I can say that word, from the conversation and move it to a human conversation. And that's really the work that I do and I'm trying to do and I want to invite other women into, is to have a human conversation about all of the issues that are dehumanizing people. I mean, we could talk about every issue, right? We were talking about human trafficking and how people put a picture of an abused animal and raise tons of money in an abused person, and there's crickets. We have allowed ourselves in some way to believe that that person is less valuable. And I think the next thing you can do is check your bias. And sometimes we don't even know what that is. We all have implicit bias. I'm having to check mine all the time, but God, show me, give me eyes to see where I don't see. Open my eyes, break my heart for the ways that I have been complicit in the oppression of people, in the ways that I've exploited people. Show me how I can change the way that I see. And it's really an amazing prayer, because I know for me, when I've prayed it, God, things that come on my radar that I never saw before. One of the things that we encourage people to do in the work that I'm doing is say hello to Muslim women, particularly women in a hijab or who are fully covered. Those women feel isolated in communities, and just saying hello and striking up a conversation can not only open your eyes but their eyes, extend that Texas Southern hospitality to people that you might or you might not understand, or you might be afraid of. Be brave and take a chance. Talk to a woman at the park. Go sit by her. Offer, kids are such a great way to bring people together. I think I've had some of my best conversations, and some good friendships have started with people who maybe I would have never met otherwise through friendships. But if your Facebook feed, everyone looks like you. If you pull up your phone number and everyone in there looks like you, comes from the same socioeconomic background, can shop at the same grocery stores as you, your kids go to the same school, you are participating in the kingdom, of course, right? Because God's kingdom is about people, but not fully, because God's kingdom is about all people. And so if we really want to lean in to spaces where I think Jesus would place himself and intentionally placed himself, right? We have to now intentionally do that. Shop at a grocery store where, immigrants predominantly shop at. Strike up a conversation. There are ways to engage this issue that are human, where you can kind of divorce the politics. And then, because I am an advocate, and it's important to say, hold our politicians accountable to humane treatment of every single person.
Yeah, I think that's good work. What is the future for Tess Clarke and Seek the Peace, and what does it look like? What are you excited about? What are you most excited about doing in the upcoming future?
That's a good question. Going on this trip to El Paso and opening it up to just anyone to apply.
Can you go in a little about that and explain to everyone how they can actually be a part of this?
Yeah. I am part of a project called the Welcome Project that's partnered with the National Immigration Forum and World Relief. And we are having conversations about biblical hospitality, and we are having those with women. And so we're inviting women into an online, a digital community to keep having these conversations. And then we're going to start doing more of these trips and inviting women into bearing witness with us and hearing stories and learning alongside us. And so those are two ways that people can get involved. And I'll give you that specific information
so
people can join us in that work. But I think something that happened on that trip that I'm just so excited about is that women came on this trip and said, I was about to walk away from my faith. I have been so discouraged with how my church community or how my husband or my family has responded to these issues that I care about, who I have seen them continually look away, and I have felt so alone and so isolated. But now I feel like I have a place to belong. And I think that's the thing I'm so excited about, is creating a table that is so long, that is so open and so welcoming, that wherever you are on an issue of immigration, or on wherever you are on the political spectrum, wherever you are with church and God and Jesus or not, you're welcome to sit at the table and join us in this discussion, because we are all learning from one another and being informed and all being challenged by one another. And so I'm so excited about that, and the ways that I think God is going to grow that work. because God never stops inviting. And I think that's been our prayer as women. Like, God, help us always invite, because you never stop inviting. You never withhold good gifts. You never ostracize or alienate anyone. And I think this is such an important time in history to choose welcome and to choose love. And I think if I look back at my life, like, I'm never going to regret loving that person.
Yeah.
Engaging in that conversation, setting an extra place setting at my table for someone who's been marginalized by society and community. I'm never going to regret calling my senator and congressman and holding them accountable to treating people with human dignity. I'm never going to regret tucking my kids in at night and reminding them how fortunate we are to have one another and inviting them into a bigger and greater story that sets the lonely in families. Like, that is part of discipleship. That is part of the gospel going forth, is saying, like, you belong. But so often the church says you don't belong. So often, like the Big C church, if we're going to talk about that, has made rules and regulations that says certain people can't be here. Certain people don't belong here. And to say, oh, no, that's not true. And I'm going to be a woman, and I think women particularly have such an amazing propensity to bring peace to earth, who chooses welcome, who chooses to see people made in the image of God, and who chooses to confront the things in her own heart and her own sin and her own self that keep her from doing that. I'm going to ask for forgiveness. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to hold my friends accountable. Like, there's a place for all of us in this work of bringing peace to earth. Jesus tells us to do it. He invites us to do it. And so I think that those are just kind of parts of that story that he's weaving together. And I had a friend, we were talking, and she said, so often I've seen, particularly getting involved in spaces where there's injustice, is something like maybe I'm supposed to do, but I don't really want to do it. It's going to cost me something. It's going to be like, she's like, I've always had this attitude of like, I should do that. I feel like God's showing me that, like, if I would do that, he's got something there for me. Like, I'm starting to get this burning in my belly that I haven't had before, about this invitation to join Jesus in healing a broken world. And that, like, when I am doing it in the ways that I'm seeing him work, like, I'm coming alive. I'm being healed. And I think that's the invitation he has for us.
I think it's amazing. I share the same fire in my belly right now, and I've loved this time. I think it's beautiful. I think there's just an uprising of women that are literally, like, taking the charge and saying, we're going to be the change that we want to see, and we're not going to leave it up to all the lawmakers and all the men in suits, and we're going to love on God's people and really discover what humanity is and what it looks like to be in community with one another. So thank you for leading that charge. Thank you. I hope that anyone at home that wants to get involved would reach out. If you don't want to get involved and you're just intrigued by the conversation, and you just maybe today looked at a subject in a different manner than what you would previously, do me a favor, go follow Tess over on Instagram. And follow Seek the Peace on Instagram. We welcome refugees, and just follow along with what is going on the ground, because I do think it is so important to not only diversify our news feed, but also make certain that we're coming in contact with the people that are the hands and feet of Jesus on the ground. So that we can really get just a non-biased look at what is going on. So thank you so much for being here today. Absolutely. You guys, when I had the vision of the Power Project, I knew that I wanted to create a space where we as women could come together and discuss topics and issues that are relevant to us. And as someone that has always had a heart for women and children, this topic really, really pulls on my heartstrings. Not only that, it has made me reevaluate the lens that I look at this subject through. And it's my hope that today you were able to hear something that possibly stirred you to just take a different look at it than you have in the past. As always, if you enjoyed what you heard today, do us a favor, go write a review, rate us, and share us on social media so that we can keep having conversations like this week in and week out. I can't wait to chat with you next week, but until then, go out and live your best purpose-filled lives.